Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. This is an interesting piece by Gordon Chang. I've had him on the show a number of times, the author of The Coming Collapse of China. He writes about China acknowledging effectively, not formally, of course, that it can't feed its people. Beijing, the Chicoms, acknowledging they can't feed their people. He points to the Clean Plate campaign that was launched in the fall of last year to end what President Xi said was a shocking and distressing waste of food. But he notes that the people who understand China policy saw this as an effort to get the Chinese people to eat less, as sort of a precursor of potential food shortages to come. He goes through the problems with water supply. He goes through the foods that are being demanded by an increasingly affluent population that require more water and ag production. He suggests that, one of the things is that U.S. farmers are happy right now because China's become the world's largest importer of food to feed their people. And it goes back to something I recall George W. Bush saying when he talked about, the one question that he asks heads of state when he meets them is, what keeps you up at night? And he recalled the Chinese president saying that what keeps me up at night, 25 million jobs a year. I have to create, the communist way, the centrally planned way, 25 million jobs a year. This is how Bush interpreted it. I have to create that many jobs every year to maintain the stability of the communist regime in China. I need to have people at work. I need to have people fed. Otherwise, I'm sowing the seeds of revolt against the regime. Just one interesting data point with all of the concerns about how vulnerable we are to China. There are some, as we experienced during the Cold War, there's some real vulnerabilities with our chief adversary, too. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined again by Admiral James Stavridis, four-star retired admiral, served as the Supreme Allied Commander at NATO, as well as Elliot Ackerman, who's a former White House fellow and Marine who served 5 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan, where he earned the Silver Star, the Bronze Star for Valor, and the Purple Heart. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
So you two have penned a new book called 2034, A Novel of the Next War, and it's fiction, but it sort of teases out a possible scenario of how the world's lone superpower, the United States, could be drawn into armed conflict with our two chief enemies, the largest state sponsor of terror in the world, that would be Iran, and as I was mentioning, the Chinese communists. Why this scenario and playing it out in a fictional story as opposed to sort of a nonfiction distillation, Admiral? Do we have you guys, Admiral Stavridis?
Oh, you've got Elliot. I can answer that question if you want.
Yeah, sure, Elliot, go ahead. Yeah,
sure. The idea was originally Jim's, and he had the notion that he wanted to write a novel that was sort of a cautionary tale in the tradition of Cold War literature that used to exist, 20, 30 years ago. Books like The Third World War by Jim Hackett, The Bedford Incident. And he and I have known each other for a number of years. We share an editor at Penguin Press. He approached our shared editor, and he said, great idea. Aren't you and Elliot close friends? And maybe this would be a good partnership for you all. I myself am a novelist. And so we sat down and, began kind of playing around with the idea, had a very shared vision of what this could be, a character-driven story that takes you around the world and shows how a conflict that begins in the South China Sea could really escalate out of control and bring in all the nations of the world. And with that, we said, let's write the first chapter. We wrote the first chapter, and we were off to the races, and the result is 2034.
And this is Admiral Stavridis. The only thing I would add is that it starts in the South China Sea with a group of Navy destroyers and then quickly moves to Iran So you're absolutely right. As we look out and look at our potential challengers out there in the future, Dan and Amy, we have to be mindful that we could get pulled into a war. And by the way, I agree with Gordon Chang, who's a good friend. China is not 10 feet tall. And as a result, we need to be strong in our deterrent if we're going to avoid the events in 2034.
So this fictional story that you guys tell in 2034, a novel of the next World War, is this in part an indication that you think if we're going to have armed conflict or a run up to the possibility of armed conflict, this is where we need to focus. We're not going to be pulled into something in Central America. We're not going to be pulled into something in the Middle East per se. It's going to be sort of these axis of evil, to borrow a phrase, countries like Iran, and I would include China since they're committing a genocide.
I would agree with that. And the whole idea here is to sound a cautionary tale that tells us we better be mindful. One of the technologies in the book is a massive cyber attack. Space is very much here. We've got a number of stealth advances. I think they're all realistic by the time 2034, the year comes around. So being aware, being prepared, gathering intelligence, having a strong national defense all matters deeply.
What is your assessment, Admiral, of the military preparedness, the Navy's perhaps in particular, given sort of the threat assessments you're implicitly making in this book?
I'm concerned. China now has more warships than the United States. Ours are bigger, more capable. We deploy globally. But within 10 to 15 years, you're going to see a Chinese Navy that can go toe-to-toe with the United States. China's advancing rapidly in cyber and closing the gap with us. They're also advancing very rapidly in space. It's a good thing we have a space force. That's smart. I think the next step would be a cyber force. So I would say we still have a slight edge, but that margin is closing.
What about restarting negotiations with North Korea? I mean, you have two U.S. officials who met with counterparts in Tokyo, and Kim Jong-un's sister came out and warned the Biden administration against causing a stink as its first step, and they should watch themselves for the next 4 years.
Yeah, get used to it. As we all know, and back to Gordon Chang, by the way, he's one of the nation's experts on this. But none of that should surprise us. Kim will continue to be a colossal pain to everybody. I don't think there's any good approach here. The Obama administration tried heavy sanctions. The Trump administration tried personal diplomacy, which I commend. I think that was a smart move, but it didn't work. I think the Biden team is going to try to put more sanctions in place, but, there's no real good answer here, Dan and Amy.
This for Elliot Ackerman, since you did 5 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, sort of your assessment of the stability of that region and sort of our relationship with the change in administration with Saudi Arabia as a bulwark against Iranian hegemony there sort of folds into your story.
It certainly does. I mean, in 2034, the shadow of our forever wars looms long. And actually, one of the central characters of the book is named Qasim Farshad, and he is a brigadier in the Iranian paramilitary Quds Force, a man sort of at the end of his career, but he is very much a veteran of the wars I fought in, although he would have fought on the opposite side. So we see not only a United States that's been worn out by these sort of late empire forever wars, but also a Middle East that's been racked by them, and particularly an Iran that becomes a real player in 2034.
How important of a foundation for something lasting in the Middle East and into Northern Africa are the Abraham Accords, since they're present and accounted for?
I strongly commend the Trump administration for negotiating the Abraham Accords. The next move is to get the Saudis into it. So I think there's still work to do, but a big step forward, getting UAE involved, getting Bahrain involved. You're going to see more connection, and it's the best strategy to deal with Iran is to create a solid network of allies, partners, and friends, starting with the Gulf Arabs and, of course, Israel at the top of the list. I think that was important work that the previous administration did.
Then is the worst approach to reopen the Iranian nuclear deal and essentially, it seems to be so far, bargain from a position of weakness. So we would like to talk about these other issues, and the mullah's position is that's interesting. We're not interested in talking about other issues. We're interested in getting $5 billion in IMF loans unfrozen.
Yeah, let's look at how the Biden team is approaching this. They've kept all the sanctions in place, so the pressure is still on. I think the smart money would be not to jump back into that flawed nuclear deal. I did not support it, and I think that a better approach would be sync up with the Europeans, put a combined pressure on, consummate the Saudis coming into the Abraham Accords, then go to the Iranians and say, okay, we'll give you a very little bite of sanctions relief, but in return, you're going to have to sit down and renegotiate a tougher deal. I think that's the best path forward. Nothing's going to happen, Rob, Dan, until after the June elections in Tehran. So my advice to the Biden team is don't rush here. Play from a position of strength.
So I'm looking at the reading list for the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Gilday. And that they've got on the website, a civilian like me can access it. And it's, a lot of good recommendations to enhance my knowledge of this space. And I don't see your guys' book. I assume that's just because it's a recent release. So that'll be Admiral Gilday. I'm sure he will correct his list.
He better, and I'm going to send you his email. So
yeah, sure. I'm happy to email him. Tell him what time
and
it is.
And I do have, just for the record, I do have 2 books on that list, if you look closely. They're both nonfiction. So hopefully he'll see his way clear to putting this one on there. And your vote would help. Get on it, Dan.
True North, is one of them on there?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that I did read that. That was very good. Now maybe he's afraid it's a little too weighted for Stavridis, his reading list already, and he doesn't want to.
Yeah.
But here's what I don't see on there, and I'm very concerned, understanding the priorities of the powers that be. I don't see a white fragility. I don't see how to be an anti-racist. Of course, I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but it's a serious question. What about this identity obsession? Infiltrating the military, as we've heard from the SecDef and obviously from the president. Does that concern? This is a question for both of you guys. Does that concern you at all?
Elliot?
I'm happy to take it. One of the things that's a theme that we very much get at in the book is that, the endemic political dysfunction that has existed in the United States is hampering us in the scenario that we play forward. So what's going on in the U.S. right now does not put us in an advantageous position with regards to countering a very strong and direct external threat. Personally, am I concerned right now with the identity politics in the military? No, and I think that the military as an institution is braided together pretty strongly, and I don't think, as things currently stand, those issues concern me. Am I concerned about them within American society writ large? Yes. I think that the voices that wish to divide us right now are unfortunately much louder than the voices that wish to unite us. And if we face an external threat, we are going to need to figure out a way to be united.
The only thing I would add to that for all your listeners, and I hope we can all agree on this, out there on the front lines for the fighter pilots flying over the Arabian Gulf, for the destroyer officers sailing through the South China Sea, for our Marines and Army officers still in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria, they've got their face pointed toward the challenge. That's where they are. They're operational. That's where we want them, and I think that's where their focus is.
He is Admiral James Stavridis, 4-star retired admiral, served as the Supreme Allied Commander at NATO, and the gentleman you heard before him, Elliot Ackerman, former White House fellow and Marine, who served 5 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan. where he received the Silver Star, the Bronze Star for Valor, and the Purple Heart. Their book, a joint venture, 2034, a novel of the next World War. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us, and good luck with the book.
Thanks, Dan, and get that email
Thanks,
out
Dan.
to CNO right away.
He's writing it right now.
I'm going to say, as somebody,
stay on it, Amy.
should I start? We're going to start with as somebody who pays your salary. Do you think that'll be persuasive?
That'll be in the
Go
subject
for it.
line.
Take care.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you both, and they joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper. Hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Are you aware that AmericanEagle.com has been designing websites since the internet started? Do you know they've helped